Rivalries are the lifeblood of hockey.
The volume level in the building definitely goes up.
I love going into hostile territory.
Rivalry, pure and simple, is hatred.
Saves the shot, he scores!
A lot of tradition on both sides.
Every time Detroit meets Chicago, it's always a big game.
Kozlov takes the shot, scores!
There's hatred.
Here comes Stu Grimson to challenge Probert. Seabrook goes the red wing line, to score! Hawks win!
There's no manufacturing. The rivalry does it for you.
The Blackhawks have dispatched the Detroit Red Wings!
They are familiar foes, facing each other in more regular season games than any other two clubs in NHL history. In a rivalry dating back to 1926, when on November 24th, the then-named Detroit Cougars defeated the Blackhawks for their first ever franchise win. 8 seasons later, Chicago and Detroit, renamed the Red Wings in 1932, met for the first time in the Stanley Cup, with the Blackhawks winning their first championship in franchise history. By 1942, and the ushering in of the NHL's Original Six era, the tenor of the Wings and Hawks rivalry started to take on a nastier edge.
John Mariucci was the tough guy for the Chicago Blackhawks. And usually when John came off the bench, he didn't bother bringing his stick. He wasn't going to need it. And his rival on the Detroit Red Wings was Blackjack Stewart. And these guys, they would go at it. They'd meet at center ice, and the crowd would go wild. And these guys used to run with the mobsters in Chicago. It's become like folklore.
And while they became enemies on the ice, the two franchises had a unique off-the-ice relationship when it came to team ownership.
Jim Norris owned the Blackhawks, and his sister, Marguerite Norris, owned the Red Wings. The Norris family owned both of those teams. Detroit was at their heyday. You know, they finished first 7 years in a row, from 1948 to 1955.
Led by a young right-winger from Saskatchewan named Gordie Howe, the Red Wings had become an NHL powerhouse.
Gordie had eyes in the back of his head, and he could score. He had great wrist shots.
Not only was Gordie the best player, he was the toughest. And, you know, every arena he went into, everybody was bringing it for him. They were gunning for him.
Between 1950 and 1956, Howe, along with line mates Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay, became the toast of Motown and the envy of the hockey world, winning 4 Stanley Cups.
Pandemonium reigns here in the Detroit Olympia.
Like Howe, terrible Ted Lindsay had become a mainstay in the Motor City. But that all changed when he was traded in a blockbuster to the hated Blackhawks in July of 1957.
You know, when I went to Chicago, I had a Red Wing tattooed here, and back here on my backside. I went to Chicago. I was treated very well by management and by the fans. I wanted to beat Detroit every time we played.
In Chicago, Lindsay joined forces with a young Blackhawks team led by budding superstars Stan Mikita and the Golden Jet, Bobby Hull.
Well, I ever seen some of those pictures of him from the waist up where he was bare naked and he's just nothing but muscle. And he was strong.
The Golden Jet getting set. He may pass or shoot. He drives one.
Lindsay would retire in 1960, 1 year before Chicago would meet his former team in the 1961 Stanley Cup.
There goes the silence to end the game, and the Blackhawks are the world champions and the Stanley Cup winners for the 1960-61 season.
They won the Cup in '61, and those players were only 22 or 21 years old, and they probably should have won a few more Cups.
The Blackhawks had fabulous teams then. You had Bobby Hull shooting that big shot off the wing. You had Stan Mikita, who was a dandy centerman. You had Pierre Pilote, one of the great defensemen of his generation. You wonder why they didn't win more often.
Even with that star power, the Red Wings stood in Chicago's way. They met 4 times between 1963 and 1966, with 3 postseason meetings concluding in Detroit victories, including the memorable '66 playoff clash between Bobby Hull and Brian Bugsy Watson.
He was known as Bugsy for a reason. He got under Bobby Hull's skin like nobody else. Bugsy would just be in his face all the time and yapping at him, and it just drove Hull crazy.
By 1970, the original six era was gone, and at least for the time being, so was the Wings-Hawks rivalry. After Chicago swept Detroit in the Stanley Cup quarterfinals, realignment was in the air. The Blackhawks moved to the recently created West Division. It would be 11 years until the foes were division rivals again, and a heated reunion in the 1980s.
Here goes Frazier and Gare. Frazier with 6 and 7 left hands.
They had a big, tough team, like really tough, really big.
Gallant landing several right hands.
For most of the decade of the 1970s, the once mighty Blackhawks-Red Wings rivalry was non-existent. Symbols of the two franchises moved on to greener pastures, with both Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull joining a new rival league.
$1 million, the magic number to lure Bobby Hull to the World Hockey Association.
But the 1980s brought a revival when the two teams were once again division rivals. Prior to the 1981-82 season, the Blackhawks moved into the aptly named Norris Division, dedicated in honor of their former owner, James Norris Sr. 1 year later in 1982, after 50 years of ownership, the Norris family sold the Detroit franchise to Mike Ilitch. The Red Wings were desperate for a shot in the arm. The once proud Motor City Darlings were now known as the Dead Wings. By the 1982-83 season, they failed to qualify for postseason play 12 out of the previous 13 years. But changing ownership is one thing, changing players is another. And the arrival of Steve Yzerman in the 1983 NHL entry draft was the beginning of a Motown revival.
Well, I think they wanted to build their franchise around Pat LaFontaine, but he was picked third and I was picked fourth. You know, obviously for me, I was thrilled, hoping Detroit was a good place for me to play quickly, so I was very excited when I was acquired by the team.
And in Yzerman's second season, his team faced the Blackhawks in the Norris Division semifinal.
Greg Stephan, a two-handed baseball swing with his goal stick, and he hits Secor in the back. Now Savard hits Stephan with his stick, and they're all going to go after each other. Look, he still wants to get at him. That's ridiculous.
We played them in my second year in the playoffs. They swept us 3 straight. And for me, that was my first taste of the rivalry.
And the Blackhawks have eliminated the Red Wings in 3 straight.
The two teams would face each other again in the 1987 and 1989 playoffs, with each team winning 1 series. The rivalry was alive and well once again. Hatred on the ice, reminiscent of the old days. But now Stu Grimson played the part of John Mariucci, and Bob Probert was a modern-day Blackjack Stewart.
Grimson and Probert are just working over one another.
Stu, Bob Probert, Clash of the Titans, when these guys would get together.
Probert landing a couple of rights. Grimson tries to answer, and he does. And now Probert got in another right. And another one. And they're just standing there and toe-to-toe.
What people don't realize about Stu Grimson, the Grim Reaper as he was known, was he was also an ordained minister.
We're in Detroit. The puck is covered up by Eddie Belfour in the crease. Proby skates through the crease, knees him in the head, keeps going to the corner. Eddie gets up off the ice, chases him into the corner, and hits him from here with his blocker. Smokes him right in the yap. And Proby looked at him and said, "You hit like a girl."
Probert and the Wings were the prohibitive favorites when the teams met in the 1992 playoffs, finishing 11 points ahead of the underdog Blackhawks.
We had some excellent players, Chelios and Roenick. We had some depth, we have competition, we had a nasty edge to our game.
And Gilbert came out of there with it. A diving post check. They score! Brent Sutter picked up a loose puck and scooped a backhander in. 1:34 to go. And the Blackhawks are on the verge of getting rid of the Red Wings.
Chicago swept Detroit on their way to the Cup Finals, where they would lose to the defending champs, the Penguins. By 1995, it had been 34 years since Chicago won the Cup, and 40 years for the Red Wings. The teams would meet in the Campbell Conference Finals.
To me, that was something special. To be playing there, playing for the Detroit Red Wings original 6. We just felt that it was going to be very heated, and most games didn't disappoint.
Kozlov cruising on left wing. Here's Kozlov dancing in, takes the shot, scores! The Detroit Red Wings are winging it to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time in 29 years.
The Red Wings return to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1966. Once again, they would fall short of that elusive title. But led by their captain, Detroit would bounce back and finally make Hockeytown Title Town 2 seasons later.
The Detroit Red Wings are the Stanley Cup champions!
With a repeat performance in 1998.
Detroit Red Wings have won the Stanley Cup 1998.
Suddenly, the Red Wings had become a dynasty once again. The road to the Stanley Cup seemingly going through Detroit over the next decade, even for their rivals in Chicago.
After that, everyone was kind of thinking, you want another shot at this team to beat the Red Wings.
Detroit Red Wings are the 2008 Stanley Cup champions.
The 2008 Stanley Cup Championship was Detroit's 4th title in a span of 11 years, reaffirming Hockeytown as an elite NHL destination. But the same could not be said for their rivals from Chicago. Beginning in 1998, the Blackhawks failed to even qualify for the playoffs in 9 out of the next 10 seasons.
The Blackhawks, if you remember back then, weren't going very well. Not many people are going to United Center. The team wasn't playing well.
To be honest with you, the rivalry was old, and when I first got here, there was no rivalry.
For the longest time, I think out of respect more than anything else, the Detroit Red Wings were the guys that were the big brother, and Chicago was the little brother.
Chicago's fortunes began to turn in the 2006 and 2007 NHL entry drafts as they began to put together the pieces for their own winner.
The University of North Dakota, Jonathan Toews. And we proudly select from the London Knights, the Ontario Hockey League, Patrick Kane.
And kind of everything turned around when they got Patrick Kane coupling with Jonathan Toews. Really energized the city of Chicago as far as hockey and that Blackhawks team.
I think the good thing about being in Chicago and coming there when I did was there's a great foundation before I even came there with guys like Sharp and Seabrook and Keith and Taser being drafted there. I guess it can draw a lot of comparisons to what happened with us happened to the Red Wings too.
The arrival of the dynamic duo sparked the Blackhawks franchise, and by 2009, a hockey resurgence was alive and well in the Windy City.
Comes right out in front, wheels one, and it's in! Patrick Kane, an amazing goal!
Despite their surprising success, the barometer for the Young Hawks continued to be the reigning defending champs, who shared the big stage at the 2009 Winter Classic.
The outdoor game at Wrigley Field, I know for a fact Chicago was saying if we can beat these guys now, then we got to have them while they didn't beat them that game.
Back the other way, Datsuk. He's put to the fence. He gets into the back and he scores! Pavel Datsuk!
And while it was Detroit who ultimately enjoyed the cozy confines of Wrigley Field, Joe Louis Arena would be the site when the two teams met 4 months later for Game 1 of the 2009 Western Conference Finals.
It was a big stage for us, Detroit being the Cup champs the year before. There was a lot of incentive.
There is a thrilling atmosphere here. And shoot one, score! Bronson has shot the flick and score! Game 1 goes to Detroit.
The challenge, just how good they were. They were up here at that point, and we were down here, and we wanted to get to that level.
For a long time, the Blackhawks have been a young team. Trying to earn that respect in the National Hockey League, and the Red Wings were a team that we looked up to.
We played pretty well. We lost a couple tough games in their building right off the bat.
Yeah, you can tell right then they were inexperienced, but you can see lots of potential, lots of talent.
Well, I think that was definitely a growing up moment for us. You face a great team like Detroit, and they just handed it to us in that series.
Rafalski, and that one blocked. Another try, scores! Zetterberg! And it is 6-1.
The Red Wings would take 3 of the first 4 games and would be on home ice in Game 5 with a chance to close out the series.
And a shot, and whacked it, and front score! And the Red Wings are going to the final.
We had a lot of talent. We had the ability to get there. We just didn't quite use it the right way. And losing to Detroit in 5 games was an eye-opener.
We learned a lot from that experience as well. The deeper you go in the playoffs, the more important every single game is and every shift is, and you need everybody.
That was a great lesson for us in terms of it wasn't the talent that was going to take us where we wanted to go. It was how the game was played and how we needed to play.
It was lesson learned for the Blackhawks the following season when they ended their 49-year Cup draft.
And they score! We saw no light, we saw no signal, and we're not sure if they've set a signal of a goal yet, but they are celebrating at the other end of the ice. What chaos!
For the first time since 1961, the Chicago Blackhawks have won the Stanley Cup.
Chicago was finally back on top of the hockey world. But their next challenge was to sustain their excellence and emulate their rivals from Detroit.
Even though we won a cup in 2010, we didn't have to go through Detroit that year.
Game number 1 of the Western Conference semifinal.
Chicago's Cup win in 2010 put the Blackhawks back among the NHL's elite, but there was still unfinished business with Detroit.
Even though we won a cup in 2010, we didn't have to go through Detroit that year. For me, my 6 years in the league, they've always been a measuring stick as far as what we want to be.
The 2013 season was one for the ages for the Blackhawks, amassing 37 wins, 3 of which came against their rivals from Detroit.
Sharp fires one, and that knockdown by Quincy Kane. Kane scores!
The Blackhawks had really rolled through the regular season. Detroit really had to fight to make the playoffs, but once they got to the playoffs, their veterans, Pavel Datsyuk, Henrik Zetterberg, they really came forward and they played Red Wings hockey.
Zetterberg hammers one. Here's scores! Zetterberg!
The Red Wings eliminated the Anaheim Ducks in 7 games to advance to the Western Conference semifinal, where they awaited the Blackhawks, who had dispensed of the Minnesota Wild in 5 games.
What a thrilling atmosphere it is here in Chicago.
And in Game 1, the favored Blackhawks dominated, winning 4-1.
We never really faced adversity all year, cruised through Minnesota, and then we're facing a team like Detroit, who was kind of a wake-up call for us.
Zetterberg fed one in front, score! And it is 2-1 Detroit. Nyquist crosses over, score! That's it, he scores! Save made by Howard.
Led by the spectacular play of Red Wings netminder Jimmy Howard, Detroit took a 2-1 series lead heading into Game 4, a game that became a nightmare for Chicago captain Jonathan Toews.
Watch the stick of Toews right there.
The captain gone again, Jonathan Toews, 2 minutes for high sticking.
It was more frustration towards the referees than anything, because I truly disagree that I deserved the first 2 penalties. The third one, admittedly, yes, I did get my stick up.
Another penalty coming to Chicago, frustration setting in.
He's unraveling.
Yeah, this guy's losing it.
To see him just go into the penalty box time and time again, it's kind of tough to watch, to be honest with you, and I know that he was upset about how things were going up until that point for him personally.
Here I was taking 3 penalties in a row in a tough game on the road. It was just a culmination of all that frustration, especially knowing the position I put my team in.
The crowd roaring here in Hockey Town. Red Wings have the Hawks on the ropes.
They're going to take a 3-1 advantage.
We were favored to beat those guys, so when we were down 3-1, it was disappointing.
Facing elimination, Chicago played with an edge, and their captain made a statement.
Saves the shot, he scores!
His first goal of the playoffs.
Johnny can put things behind him real quick and move into the right place real fast, and I think that's what he did.
Back in Motown for Game 6, Detroit seemed determined to end this series at home, taking a 1-goal lead into the 3rd.
Anderson with a shot, score!
2-1 Detroit.
We're all sitting there like, this could be it. We didn't want that to
to end early for us. We pushed back as a team.
That's a score! And the game is tied! Pickle fires, he scores! Michael Frolik has made it 4-2 Chicago.
Michael Frolik's goal capped a rousing Chicago comeback, forcing a decisive Game 7 in the Windy City, a game with added pressure on the home team.
Yeah, they'd come back from a 3-1 deficit, but it's still one game. Winner take all. They lose this game. Everything that they did all year went down the drain.
Could you ask for anything more? Detroit and Chicago, Game 7.
What a game, what a feeling, right off the bat.
Sticks, slashes, punches. I mean, this is old-time hockey at its best.
And Game 7 did not disappoint. Tied at 1 late in the third, it appeared Chicago had taken the lead.
It's trickled back on down to Shaw. Shaw holding, down it back to Jalmerson. Score! And they are waving it off. No goal.
There was a lot of anger, I think, and there were a lot of people saying, what? How could that not be a goal?
Referee Stephen Walcom had blown his whistle, calling coincidental minor penalties on Kyle Quincy and Brandon Saad moments before Nicholas Jarmelsson's apparent go-ahead goal. Game 7 was heading to overtime.
The guys came in the locker room, hey, let's keep focus here, let's move ahead.
We didn't smile and we weren't happy about it, but we kind of joked in the locker room that, hey, we're going to have to win this game by 2 goals tonight.
Seabrook on the red wing line, shoots a score! Hawks win! Hawks win!
There's no better team to compare yourselves to than the Detroit Red Wings, so to finally beat them this year, the way that series went down in 7 games, finally felt like we proved ourselves to a certain degree.
The Blackhawks have dispatched the Detroit Red Wings!
The series win over Detroit helped propel Taves and the Blackhawks to their 2nd Stanley Cup in 4 years. But they'll defend their title in a new NHL, where realignment will alter this classic rivalry.
We know that every time we play Detroit, which is going to be twice a year now, it's going to be a pretty special event.
It's now East meets West when the Wings and Hawks drop the puck. But the rivalry endures, dating back to a golden age of hockey, when iconic players squared off in iconic buildings. And over the span of 10 decades, they have left indelible memories on a glorious sheet of ice. Chicago and Detroit, original NHL rivals.